Okay, so welcome to our first panel of this weekend. We're focused on student activism, and when I went out to look for people, clearly Antioch has, a tremendous history of activists, and I've found 4 individuals who I think have not only were active when they were here at Antioch, but also pretty much devoted their lives to progressive causes going forward through the rest of their life to where they are today. And I think they're great examples that I referred to at dinner last night of, what Antioch students can do once they graduate and get out into the world. So I'm going to introduce them one by one, and we'll let them tell you their stories. And I asked them to talk a little bit about what their activism was here when they were on campus, and also what they've done after they left. And I think you'll find them fairly inspiring stories that I have. And I actually, asked them basically to talk about how their life was here and how that influenced them going forward. So just quickly, I can run around the panels here. I have Jeff Mackler, who's the earliest. He'll be a graduate from 63. Larry Rubin, there, from 65. Wendy here, who was the class of 68, and Jeff Jones, who actually didn't complete Antioch, but went on to quite a history. So he's a welcome panelist for here. So let me talk about Jeff for a minute, and then I'll let him tell you his story. Jeff was an early organizer of protests at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base before I even protested there, when the peace movement was in full gear. And they were looking to basically highlight Wright-Patterson Air Force Base as a strategic air command base and nuclear weapons. And so it was pretty much the anti-nuclear group. He was president when he was here of the Antioch Peace Group. And after graduation, he was on the committee for the National Peace Action Coalition. He's currently on the steering committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition, and he's the current national secretary of the Socialist Action Party, and he was its presidential candidate in 2016 and 2020. So Jeff, the podium is yours.
Well, first, how wonderful it is.
And I think you're muted here.
And to see old friends like Larry Rubin. We spent many hours doing good things at Antioch.
Hang on, we're trying to find a sound bite for you here.
Can you hear me?
Oh, Jeff is in Oakland.
Jeff is in Oakland. Larry is in the Midwest here somewhere.
Mississippi.
And the other Jeff is in New York. So we're spread across the continent.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you online.
Is there a way to unmute everybody here? You're working on it? Okay. Thank you. So Larry and I trial ran this yesterday and it seemed to work fine. Now they can hear us.
There you need wallpaper. Now they can hear you.
All right, now why don't you all three talk and let me see if I can hear any of you here.
Howdy, hello, from Mississippi.
There's my man. All right. Jeff, try again.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
We're good. All right.
Yes.
Now the podium is yours.
Okay, is it my turn?
Yeah.
And David, tell us how much time you want our presentation to be.
You can give me 10 minutes. I think that'll be good.
Okay. My first day on campus, I won a contest at Antioch in Corey Hall for fly swatting. I organized it, and I swatted more flies than anyone else. And lo and behold, one of our hallmates, Afi Wortham, walked in and said that he just tried to get a haircut downtown on Xenia Avenue at Gegner's, and Mr. Gegner refused and called him a nigger. And I, of course, who was the constitutional expert, said, well, that's illegal. It says in the Constitution of the United States that a barber has to cut everybody's hair. And people said, are you sure that's in the Constitution, Jeff? I said, I'm absolutely certain. And then they said, well, what are you going to do about it? And I said, I'm going to tell Mr. Gegner. And I walked down 5 minutes away to the barber shop. And I told Mr. Gegner, Louis Gegner, that he was violating the Constitution of the United States. He asked my name, and then he said, get your nigger-loving kike ass out of my fucking barber shop. He sort of kicked me into the movement, so to speak. And I went to the first meeting on campus the next day of the NAACP. We had, believe it or not, 700 members, and it was the largest chapter in the country. And it was headed by Eleanor Norton Holmes. Ellie Holmes, we called her, who became a congressman for Washington. And she swore that she would not graduate Antioch until Gegner's was desegregated. Well, needless to say, we embarked on a 5-year battle to desegregate that barber shop. And every time we had a mass meeting, and we had hundreds of students in the NAACP, it would go on for weeks of voting until the administration would finally convince us that we should use other channels than a sit-in. And if we sat in, we would be arrested. It would affect our getting into graduate school. And so we filed the lawsuit and we won. And the court fined Mr. Gegner $1 suspended court fees for segregating. He appealed that to the Ohio Supreme Court, who ruled, these are years of legal battles, that cutting a black man's hair was a new skill and that Gegner got his dollar back. We had protests, we talked to the mayor, we asked the city council to pass resolutions until finally, in 1963, after 5 years of efforts, we decided to vote for a sit-in. And the NAACP, which was only for legal action, told us that they wouldn't support it. We quit the NAACP, the largest chapter in the country with 800 members or 7. And we formed the Antioch Committee for Racial Equality, which was affiliated with SNCC. We sat in the barbershop 700 strong. 700 of us were arrested in rotating form. We occupied 13 barber chairs, and Afi walked in first, and Gegner said, we don't cut niggers' hair, and they arrested him. What do you want, Mackler, they said. And I said, I want a haircut, but Afi was first. And they arrested me, took me to jail in Xenia, and charged me with inciting to riot with force and violence. The Quakers, which were very strong, defended me, and 5 years later I won my lawsuit, but not before I was kept out of graduate school, rejected to 13 law schools. So it was an exciting time. We only had a handful, perhaps a dozen blacks on campus, but campus was quite a fascinating place. And I want to describe that. I was housed in Corey Hall. Louis Corey was a founding member of the Communist Party. Antioch was one of the few who, during the witch hunt, refused to fire professors who were charged with communism. Antioch had a strong tradition of civil liberties. We formed the Antioch Committee to abolish the House Committee on Un-American Activities. And a few right-wingers formed the Antioch Committee to abolish the Antioch Committee to abolish HUAC. So we turned around, I think Larry was part of it, and we formed the Antioch Committee to abolish the Antioch Committee to abolish the Antioch Committee to abolish HUAC. It was called ACA-HUAC, ACA-HUAC, and so on. We formed the chapter, the Student Peace Group, and we met at the Quaker Meeting Hall. We organized demonstrations around Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. At first, we marched the 9-mile diameter of total destruction if there were to be nuclear war. And that didn't stop nuclear war. So we did the, we started with the radius, we went to the diameter, and then we had a huge march around the circumference, something like 27 miles. And they continued. We formed the Student Peace Union in Antioch, which had the first national conference of 800 students from around the United States. And we debated and debated. We had a wonderful tradition of debate in Antioch. My roommate was Peter Irons, who with me turned in his draft card and went to jail. I turned in my draft card, and then Peter saw me at 3 o'clock in the morning taping it together again. I decided that I didn't want to go to jail, but Peter went to jail for 4 years, not one day off. He went back to Antioch and graduated. His father was died of radiation and was a member of the Manhattan Project, which worked on the atomic bomb. Peter went back to Antioch, graduated with Howard Zinn at Boston University, went to Harvard and graduated from Harvard Law School, filed a suit against his illegal arrest and imprisonment, got a pardon and an apology from the President of the United States, went on to file against the United States government for Japanese internment, wrote a 1,000-page book and led the legal suit that overturned the internment of the Japanese during World War II. He was a magnificent roommate. Another hallmate of mine was Stephen Jay Gould. We went to high school together. Stephen and I used to give competing lectures, me for a mass crowd of 20 people to defend the Cuban Revolution, and Stephen Jay Gould on the sex life of a clam. Steve became the world's leading evolutionary biologist. He taught at Harvard, and he remained a friend and offered my party the right to publish all of his books. So we had a lot of wonderful people. Joni Rabinowitz was one of the activists there. Her father was Victor Rabinowitz, who with Leonard Boudin, Victor Rabinowitz, and Arthur Schutzer started the Emergency Civil Liberties Committee, which was a national committee that defended victims of the McCarthyite witch hunt, who the ACLU refused to defend. I later met Victor in court. He argued more cases before Leonard Boudin than any other lawyer in history. And he took a case that we filed when we were in the SWP, when the government admitted that they had sent 1,100 spies into our party at that time, the Socialist Workers' Party. We filed a COINTELPRO suit against the government, got thousands of organizations, and became the first group in America to win, with an apology from the government, a fine, and an admission that the government had no right to send spies into our party. 10 years earlier, the government arrested the entire leadership of the Socialist Workers' Party on the eve of World War II and put them in jail because they had Marxist literature. So Antioch was a wonderful, rich experience. I went there as a 164-pound, young, wiry, strong athlete that could dunk basketballs and was eager to compete against the national champion, Ohio State. And sure enough, Antioch didn't have any basketball teams other than intramural teams. But I met young people from all over the country who are interested in social justice, whose parents, like Peter's, were active against nuclear weapons. Stephen Jay Gould's parents, like mine, came from the Communist Party, but they refused to tell us because they figured that their blabbermouth kids would get them fired for their jobs. After my first experience at Antioch, I decided to become a nuclear pacifist, went home and told my parents I was going to be a conscientious objector. And my father said, conscientious objector, why not a communist? And I started running around the house and I said, Daddy, are you a communist? Your father is a communist. And my mother chimed in, your mother too. Antioch had a rich political life. We were debating always between kids who came from Communist Party, Stalinist backgrounds, Social Democrats, and Trotskyists. It was there that I first ran into the Trotskyist movement, who defended civil liberties and democratic rights, and a democratic, inclusive anti-war movement. I graduated in Antioch and went to graduate school in Buffalo, where I became the head of the Buffalo Committee to abolish HUAC. Buffalo held hearings, HUAC held hearings across the United States, charging communist professors with communist ideas and demanding that they name names. They refused and many went to jail. Antioch regularly had these type of people visit us. Frank Wilkinson, Willard Uphouse, and others regularly visited Antioch, and they were charged and called before the House Committee or the local state committee to name names, and when they refused, they went to jail, sometimes for a year or two. Antioch welcomed them over and over, Carl Braden, Willard Uphouse, and so on. After I graduated, I became a socialist and joined the Young Socialist Alliance. I spent 10 years fighting against the war in Vietnam and was one of the founders of the it was the National Anti-War Coalition that mobilized millions against the war. When we started mobilizing against the war at the height of the witch hunt, the polls showed that some 13% of the American people were opposed to the war and the rest supported it. By the time we were finished, we had organized massive democratic, united, inclusive demonstrations that had millions, and the polls showed that 78% of the American people were against the war. So we played a major role in the anti-war movement. I became a leader of the teachers union in New York and was elected to be the state vice president of the California Federation of Teachers and an organizer for the Hayward Federation of Teachers and a delegate to the Central Labor Council. I am currently on the National Steering Committee of Julian Assange's defense. Julian Assange was the founder of WikiLeaks, who released the Iraq war logs, and who, like Daniel Ellsberg, who died last week, was persecuted because he told the truth and horror of US wars. I am the founder and director of the Mobilization to Free Mumia Abu Jamal. He's a Black innocent political prisoner in Philadelphia who has been in jail, most of it on death row, an innocent man framed up for murder by the racist Philadelphia Police Department. He's been in jail for 40 years. I'm a founder of the Northern California Climate Mobilization. We organize tens of thousands of people to protest global warming, perhaps the first. Can I take another minute and wrap it up, Dave?
Yes, you can have another minute.
Okay. So I learned about politics and humanity and love for people and good humor and goodwill from Antioch. J.D. Dawson went to jail at Xenia and bailed me out with a fund of $50. The Quakers defended us. And after I graduated, young people a year or so later, like Larry Rubin, led mass protests down Xenia Avenue with students from Central State and Wilberforce, two Black land-grant colleges 9 miles away, that marched downtown and were prevented from doing so, but Gegner refused to cut. Gegner closed his barbershop and we desegregated. I was taken out of jail and out of my apartment and put back in the dorm under security because the Klan threatened to kill me. We had a vibrant life at Antioch. We were ranked 9th in the country for liberal arts colleges by the Ford Foundation. We had a magnificent science department headed by people like Ali Loud, who ran for governor of the state of Ohio on the Progressive Party ticket in the 1940s. Our professors were progressive and fine teachers. Benjamin Spock's son, Mike Spock, was one of our students there. We had a vibrant political life of constant debate and very little acrimony. We differed, but we debated it out and we decided what to do. And sometimes we backed off and sometimes we moved forward. I cherish the years I spent at Antioch and the good friends that I made there. And I appreciate the effort of David Southern and others to get us back together. It's 60 years since I graduated and 65 years since I walked in a Gegner's Barbershop. I've maintained that commitment to democratic and human rights ever since. I was arrested 9 times in civil rights demonstrations across the United States. I ran for president of the United States against Obama and Trump. You may know that I lost those elections. I spoke to young people across the country. I've written 25 books and pamphlets, all of them in the tradition of open inquiry, honesty, and telling the truth about the racist imperialist policy of the United States. I send you the greatest feelings of love and admiration for Antioch and for the wonderful student activists who followed our tradition.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, now you see what I was talking about last night? His bio doesn't give justice to all of this, right? Totally. All right, our second speaker is Larry Rubin, who graduated 2 years after Jeff. While in Antioch, Larry worked for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Some of you may have heard of that. In Mississippi and Georgia, talk about a challenge. He served as the National Education Director for the National Student Association until he found out that the CIA was funding their activities overseas, at which point he resigned in protest. He was a reporter for the Daily Dayton News and spent a long time doing journalism and writing. He's worked in various public relations and writer roles with the United Electrical Radio and Machine Workers Union and the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. He's been a member of the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee and the New Jewish Agenda. And I'm sure I haven't done justice to your bio either. So you may take the podium and help us out here.
Thank you very much. I have to say, it's hard for me to express what it's like to be with Jeff after all these years. He was a great influence on me. And actually, I lived in his apartment. He gave me and my wife at the time his apartment when he moved to San Francisco. And I've been always grateful for that. I would actually love to talk about what I am doing today. I am talking to you from Mississippi, from Holly Springs, Mississippi, which is where I worked for SNCC when I dropped out of Antioch. I thought I dropped out. Turned out I didn't. Turned out I was on co-op job when I returned. They wouldn't let me drop out. Tried to drop out. Also, I owed them some co-op credits, and money for that. But anyway, in a way, I've never left Antioch, being here in Holly Springs. And I would love to talk about what I'm doing now. It's voter rights work. I was appointed by the Marshall County as a voting official. Marshall County is majority Black. And years ago, I never thought I would say those words. I'm a Mississippi voting official. Also, I'm working on Medicaid expansion and on turning this area, which is 85% Black, into an area of Black culture and history open to everybody. I'd love to talk more about that, but my assignment from David, as he said, was to talk about what Antioch meant to us, the role that Antioch played in our lives. And so I'm going to leave Mississippi a moment and go back to 1959, when a buddy of mine, Rachel Markin, and I hitchhiked to Antioch from Philadelphia. And we met with Fressa B. Inman, the registrar. And we didn't so much apply for admission as for asylum from the McCarthy period. As Jeff said, and my parents also were in the Communist Party, and so was Ray's. And at school, in fact, our whole lives, we were really victims. You know, we knew we were communists, or at least we knew we were different. Like Jeff said, our parents try to hide this from us a bit to protect us. But when you turn on the television and you see all these shows about how the communists are out to get us and they're evil, and I led 3 lives and all this, and we knew that that was us. In some kind of way, the world thought our country thought we were evil. So we heard about Antioch. And we hitchhiked and we explained our situation, and we gained early admission. We were told if we, early acceptance, not early admission. We were told if we finished our 12th grade and didn't flunk out, we could come to Antioch. Now, I have to tell you, we didn't know we were activists. We didn't know that word, activists. We just knew the country was out to get us. And at Antioch, we would be free to talk about whatever we wanted to talk about. We didn't go to Antioch because Antioch was an activist place. Didn't know that word, actually. We went to Antioch because we knew Antioch was a safe place for us, that we could be us at Antioch. And that's an important distinction, because when the university closed or tried to close Antioch, they said that they would continue the activist tradition of Antioch at this university. But what they meant was they would teach largely online about peace, about activist subjects. They would be they would teach progressive subjects. But Antioch was more than that. Antioch was a total environment in which everybody could express themselves and everybody could be themselves. We were a community of scholars. We didn't have student government. We had community government. We were treated not by the college, not in loco parentis. That is not the college taking the place of our parents, but we were treated as adults. This is what Antioch offered, and still does. And I'm very proud of that. Anyway, so we hitchhiked to Antioch, and we asked for asylum, and we were granted it a year in advance. But it turns out, not because of our story of being victimized by the McCarthy period, but because we took the initiative to hitchhike. That's what impressed Fressa B. Inman. We hitchhiked there. And that actually followed the Antioch tradition of entrepreneurship. Arthur Morgan's, his contribution to the Antioch philosophy was what he called the third way. Different from capitalism or socialism, he had the idea of small entrepreneurship, which meant taking initiative in his mind. I'm not commenting on whether this is a sustainable philosophy, But that's what impressed Professor Began. He hitchhiked. Again, I didn't exactly know I was an activist. I came to Antioch, and Steve Gould got me involved in the NAACP. And I think eventually I became president. Then I was chair of ACRE that Jeff spoke about. In fact, I told Steve, I said, well, Steve, why are you messing around with these shells? What kind of crap is that? You know, you got to fight for the revolution. You know, what are you messing? I didn't know he was a genius. And as Jeff said, he would become the leading evolutionary scientist in the country. They were just messing around with shells. I was wrong. I was wrong about a lot of things. The first year at Antioch, I found myself in Cuba. Jeff already mentioned Jody Rabinowitz and her father, Victor Rabinowitz. Victor and his law firm were the attorneys for Fidel Castro in the United States. And they arranged for a group. Jeff, I don't know if did you go to Cuba with us? You did. Steve Martino did, you know, a lot of folks. We were the last group, the Antioch group was the last group to go to Cuba totally legally. We flew from Key West for $5 on Air Cubano Airlines. We were in Cuba, the Antioch group was, when the United States broke relations with Cuba. And it was a question of whether the State Department would let us back into the country. They did, but we couldn't have gotten on a plane and returned to Cuba. That to me was part of Antioch. And it was the part that Antioch allowed that to happen in its environment. I got active in the NAACP. When I was chair of ACRE, Jeff mentioned demonstrations, big demonstrations for Gagners. I'll just tell one story. I mean, for pushing Gagners really to follow, I don't know if it was in the Constitution then, but it became the law later when the state of Ohio formed the Public Accommodations Commission, that he had to cut people's hair, everybody's. The National Association for the Advancement of White People got involved to support Gagner. And they came and they picketed for Gagner. Except that Judge, I forget his name now, from Greene County, had put a limit on the number of pickets that could picket Gagner. It was an injunction. I'm going to say no more than 4 people could picket Gagner. Well, the question was, who would grab that picket line first that day when the National Association for the Advancement of White People came to picket for Gagner? Turns out they did. They were willing to get up at 5 a.m. and they formed a picket line in front of Gagner. We marched down Xenia Avenue, and Arthur Morgan was with us in this big march. And we were across the street. The NAACP was in front of Gagner's picketing. We were across the street with several hundred people. And it occurred to me, wait a minute, there's an injunction. No more than 4 people can picket. So I asked somebody to cross the street, join the picket line. They did. The white people took 1 person off because they didn't want to get arrested. Hey, we got something going. So somebody else went. They took somebody off. Somebody else went. Now there were 3 of us and 1 of them. And then they realized that they were, you know, being made fools of. So 1 of them got back on. So Sheriff Bradley came and read the injunction and arrested the whole group. White people and ACRE, Antioch Committee for Racial Equality. The headline said, pickets, picket, pickets. And the whole bunch was sent to Xenia County Jail. Later, Asher Bogan, maybe he was your attorney as well, Jeff, became the attorney for everybody, this whole group, in front of the judge. And it was weird because he was also representing the white person, the fascist. And I'll never forget this. He said, I forget his name. He said, "Are you white?" And Mr. Asher said, "Yes." And Asher said, "How do you know?" And that kind of confused him. Anyway, I think everybody was found guilty, but fined a minimal amount of money. This was right after I had come back from Southwest Georgia. I was organizing for SNCC, and my lung collapsed. And I came back to Antioch to recuperate, and became, in that period, chair of ACRE. And I also led the Antioch Dayton delegation to the March on Washington, because this was 1963. And this was the beginning of another theme to me of what Antioch meant. On the one hand, Antioch was kind of a bubble of protection. We were allowed to be ourselves when we knew that the rest of the world was against us. And I'm talking politically now. We were sons and daughters of Congress, red diaper babies. I think.
Can I get you to wrap up in about a minute?
Sure.
You do that?
At the March on Washington, however, I saw a big slice of America. Antioch brought me into the world. It also brought me into the world in the sense of allowing me to have I was editor of the Record, allowing me to have the qualifications to work for the Dayton Daily News, to work for the National Student Association, which I ended up in Washington. It was part of the mainstream discussion. Antioch, in short, was an institution that both protected you from what otherwise would have been tremendous consequences for you being yourself, but also allowed you to become part of the world. And I think Antioch is continuing in that tradition today, and I applaud it.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to switch gears a little bit. Was it Cadden or Cadden?
Cadden.
Wendy Cadden is a class of 68, is a well-recognized printmaker, painter, and activist who's dedicated her art to supporting progressive causes. These include the American Indian occupation of Alcatraz, the Black Power movement, and the Berkeley Free Speech movement. She's participated in the formation of the Gay Women's Liberation, the Lesbian and Family Movement in Northern California. And she is a founding member of the Women's Free Press and director of Diana Press, publishing the works of many lesbian and feminist poets and writers. So Wendy, your host.
I get to be in person.
Yep, you get to be in person.
Oh my goodness. Okay. All right. I'm so. Oh goodness. Well, I did all that because of Antioch. I mean, this was a place that was obviously for all of us an inspirational place, or we wouldn't come back again. And David, thank you for organizing this panel, making it happen. And thanks to all the activists who have carried the torch for us for so many years. And I want to talk about media. I want to talk about unsocial media, what I learned at Antioch. I almost wanted to say antisocial, but I call it unsocial media, the ways that we collectively got so much done during the 50s and 60s and 70s, and why I believe we have such a backlash today. Yeah. I came to Antioch ready to learn, engaged with new ideas and new friends, ready to transform myself into a professional activist. I already had that notion of activism. I came from a family of journalists and political organizers who had been brought up before the House Un-American Activities Committee, but more importantly, had gotten a lot of work done during their lifetimes. So I had learned quite a lot about communication, the craft of communication, about the basics of printing and ways to get the word out. When I arrived at Antioch, Marshall McLuhan's ideas were in the fore. The medium, he said, is the message. The way we communicate is as important as the message itself. And he could envision technology allowing us to create a global village. He was way ahead of his time, right? But our culture had been shaped by type, by the written word, by the first books to be printed in multiples. The written word gave us a proliferation of broadsides, of newspapers, of posters, of publishing houses, and the mass distribution of books. Even as many people were excluded from literacy in libraries, print produced a more democratic society. Ideas could be shaped and shared by large groups of people. At Antioch, I was surrounded by brilliant thinkers, all in formative stages of their lives, ready to become activists, muralists, journalists, writers, disability activists, painters, budding filmmakers, all preparing to change the world. Our generation of activists began with very few sophisticated tools for film and video and marginal access to TV or even radio. When we wanted to get the message out, we used music, guerrilla theater, poster art, speeches, and the written word for mass organizing. Mostly our media was direct and distribution person to person. What I remember about Antioch was the proliferation of posters. Every room had psychedelic posters, movie posters of Casablanca and La Dolce Vita, not to mention posters that were political. Many people think that social media is a wonderful tool for this global village. And I keep reminding people of what we have always said. Freedom of the press belongs to those who own the presses. To get the word out, we needed to own the media. Act up, own the media when we created the AIDS quilt that rocked the nation with its powerful message of the scope of the AIDS epidemic, the human toll, and the beauty of each and every soul. The United Farm Workers' Great Boycott controlled the message when we picketed Safeway supermarkets across the country and shut many of them down. Artist Judy Baca took control of walls spanning a half-mile in Los Angeles to create murals depicting the people's history of California. They stand as a public record of community activism, interracial harmony, and the accomplishments of working people, working artists. The occupation of Alcatraz Island by the American Indian movement, these are all movements that I participated in or photographed. They headlined the message from Native voices protesting broken treaties and ongoing genocide. Now, social media allows us to be witnesses to the past, to information and opinions that we have not shared before. I love this, but I remind myself that if we do not control the media, we do not control the message. In the words of Audre Lorde, if you don't use your power, somebody else will. When I first came to Antioch, I was well aware of the harsh conditions of apartheid, Jim Crow in the American South, the legacy of slavery, of lynchings, and the realities of police brutality in our streets. When my co-op job took me to the American Southwest, however, I became aware of how ignorant I was about the Spanish and Mexican history of the Western territories and the systematic subjugation and genocide of Native people, the depth and breadth of Native culture and practices. When I returned to Antioch, I knew I wanted to continue my media study methods of communication. Antioch had a lithography press tucked away in the art department that had been handcrafted by a former art teacher, Robert Whitmore. I found it unused for many years and began to learn the trades. First from a man at the bookplate company who shared the basics of linotype and letterpress. And then on my own, I started printing on the abandoned press. Years later, out of a group we called Gay Women's Liberation, we formed the Women's Press Collective, and along with the Women's Place Bookstore, Diana Press, we transformed Oakland into a women's community, publishing and printing and distributing books, and with Olivia Records music. The first Rape Crisis Center was open, an innovative women's health center. Hente was formed by activist women of color who sang and wrote and spoke out for social justice and founded the Lesbian Archives. We took back the streets in force and assisted women in combating domestic violence, changing locks on many doors. This I learned at Antioch. A lot of the technical skills, shared information about pregnancy and prevention and abortion, helped women detox while caring for their children, supported women in court who dared to confront their rapists. Antioch prepared me for all of this direct action. It was our boot camp. Our media was action. Our message was empowerment. We owned and controlled the presses, and we shared equipment with Inkworks, a print shop that produced brilliant political posters, and with the Black Panther Party, who produced newspapers for more than a decade with a circulation of 300,000 copies a week at its height. That's a lot of serious likes. My message, media control, is in peril. Imagine a week without connectivity, without the internet. Just imagine it was shut down. The media has become the message. And blessings on the muralists that blazoned the streets in bright yellow with Black Lives Matter.
Now, if somebody can just get to Rupert Murdoch, we could control the press.
All right.
All right. Last but not least, for sure, we have Jeff Jones. And this is an interesting bio. So Jeff attended Antioch for 2 years, it looks like here, leaving in April of '67, but Antioch definitely left his impression on him. So he joined both the anti-war movement, that's why he left Antioch, I think, and the Students for Democratic Society. He was part of the group of Antiochians who went to Cincinnati in 1965 to participate in the first International Day of Protest against the Vietnam War. He attended his first SDS convention in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, that December, and helped organize a national SDS conference here at Antioch. The next year, for his second co-op job, he worked with the Yellow Springs Dayton Area Coordinating Committee against the Vietnam War. He left Antioch in '67 to become the SDS Regional Coordinator for New York City. He was elected SDS Interorganizational Secretary in June of 1969, when I came to Antioch. And that winter, after the police killing of Black Panther leader Fred Hampton in Chicago, Jeff helped organize, along with a couple other Antiochians, the Weather Underground, and was a federal fugitive until his arrest in October 1981. He went on to become a journalist and is today active supporting the environmental and climate justice movement. He currently lives in New York's Capital Region, where he lobbies the state legislature on behalf of environmental and clean energy organizations. He's the chair of the board of the Harlem-based We Act for Environmental Justice and president of Adirondack-based John Brown Lives. Who knew? So Jeff, it's all yours.
David, thank you very much. Hi. Greetings, everybody. So sorry not to be there. Is it working?
Yes.
Okay, good. And I realize now when I wrote that for you that that's my entire prepared speech. So it's been great, everybody. I do want to say, out of respect, much respect for my elders who have spoken today and did all the great work over the years at Antioch, that I came to Antioch in the fall of 1965, having grown up in a Quaker community in Southern California, and with a father who had been a conscientious objector in the Second World War, a beautiful community of people. But I also was very active in the YMCA, and I remember as I was leaving to head east, that someone that I had known in the YMCA said, "Whatever happens, don't let them change you when you get to Yellow Springs, when you get to Antioch." Well, that lasted for 6 weeks. Exactly 6 weeks, and that's when I went to Cincinnati for the first International Days of Protest against the Vietnam War. That day, I feel dramatically changed my life, and I always appreciate having been at Antioch for that to happen. We were out in front of the Federal Building. We were surrounded. We had to be escorted away to safety by the Ohio State Police, or the Cincinnati Police. I don't know how often that happened. We went to have a gathering at a home that night in Cincinnati. I can't remember whose home it was, but they were people that some of you probably know who had ties to the trainings that went on for Freedom Summer the year before, and a brick came through the window and hit one of the people who was at this gathering with us. Fortunately, she was not injured, but we were all. It was what we called in the hippie days a reality sandwich, and it really that began a commitment on my part to be a part of the anti-war movement at a militant level, and. The other thing that I attribute to Antioch specifically is that I arrived at a time when they were launching the new, they called it, this is what they told us, new experimental first year program. I don't know how, I know there was a lot of controversy over time. We began to realize that some of the professors didn't like the idea that we were being told that we could direct our own education. And the other thing that was going on simultaneously, I believe, is that I believe it was the Rockefeller Foundation had put some serious money on the table to recruit some Black students to increase the Black population at Antioch, and that had a very profound effect on the Antioch community to a really important degree in 1965, 66 while I was there. I'll just say there was talk earlier about the importance of hitchhiking. So since I was responsible for my own education in the fall of 1965, got together with a couple of friends and I said, okay, let's hitchhike to Washington, D.C. and lobby against the war in Vietnam. And I'll never forget those nighttime rides in some big semi trucks over through West Virginia and into D.C. Then we went into the Capitol and we lobbied against the war and we hitchhiked back to Antioch. And that was my main project in the fall of 65. The next year, I did work with the Dayton area. It was a new organization. There was just two of us, the Dayton Area Coordinating Committee Against the War. And we did a lot of work around southwestern Ohio, and then went down into Kentucky and made it as far as Tennessee for a series of anti-war meetings. This was in 66. But the other thing that happened to me at that time was some of the people that I had become friends with, that I'd been drawn to just for their politics and their personality, said, hey, let's go to New York City for the weekend. And I said to myself, is that something we can do? So we piled into a VW bus. I remember, a Beetle. There was, I think, 5 of us. I remember it as the most uncomfortable 20 hours of my life. Came across the George Washington Bridge at about 6:30 in the morning, and I said, oh my, this is where I want to be. And so I changed all my plans and basically threw myself into New York City, where I did political work for the next, I'm still doing political work in New York City, but I lived there for the next 25 years until I kind of began to return to some of my Southern California roots, which included a lot of outdoors. My family camped every weekend that I can remember growing up, somewhere in the mountains of the Sierras or along the California coast, south of Santa Barbara. That was the outdoors was a very big part of my life, and it's a relief to me that I have been able to work all these years in the environmental movement. And I would like to just say a few more words about that. But finishing up with the experience that led me to the Weather Underground. Our headquarters were in Chicago. We've heard reference to the working with the Panthers. We became very close with Fred Hampton, the Chicago Panther leader, who we didn't agree about everything. We had some very real and significant discussions over the year, not over the years, unfortunately, over the months. But in fact, I was on a radio program with him talking about the movement in late November of 1969, and he was gunned down by the Chicago police. Emotional moment about 6 days later, and so to be that close to someone who was assassinated by the police in a situation for which no one has ever been held accountable had a very profound impact on my life and the decisions that I made. And the group the militant wing of SDS that I was involved with, we can talk about that someday if anybody's interested, but we were wondering if and this is the biggest mistake we made, in my opinion. We were wondering if mass protests were effective anymore. Look, this was 1969. Little did we know the war would go on for another 5 years. Another 1.5 million people would be killed in Vietnam. Another 25,000 American soldiers would be killed. But we felt like we needed to take our resistance to the Vietnam War to a higher level. And at the same time, the civil rights movement, I think, as this audience is probably quite aware, was transitioning to the Black liberation struggle. And so at the same time as wanting to become more militant in relation to the war in Vietnam, we also felt an obligation to actually open another front and become a problem for the government so that they couldn't direct all their attention at repressing the Panthers. Okay, that's what we thought we were doing. It can be evaluated whether we were right or whether we were successful. But not only did we set out to do that, but we did it for 5 years, and some people did it for longer. There was Larry, you were talking about knowing, I think Joni, or maybe Jeff, you were talking about knowing Joni Rabinowitz. Kathy Boudin, one of my best friends who just died earlier. She died last year. So she's been gone for a little over a year now. We were together in the underground years. We supported her for the 22 years that she was in prison. And then we were best friends in the years after she got out of prison, and her loss is a tremendous loss. I feel that every day. So, and that's just one example of people in that category. It's a very broad, quick passage through my history, but after dealing with my legal problems, after being arrested and ending the fugitive years, I did actually become a reporter at the Guardian newspaper in New York City, left-wing publication. And then that led to another deepening of the journalism career when we moved upstate. And moving upstate kind of brought me back closer in touch with my sort of outdoor DNA. So I became the communications director of a statewide environmental organization. But at the same time, throughout all of this, I've always focused on things from the point of view of fighting white supremacy and supporting the Black liberation struggle. And so today I'm active in the climate movement. I'm very proud to be a part of this organization based in Harlem called We Act for Environmental Justice. We Act has an office in Washington, D.C. now, federal policy office. We're very active in New York City, in New York State, and this year will be the third year that we've actually had a presence at the COP, the global climate movement. And last year, I wasn't there. I haven't taken these trips. This year we'll be in Dubai. God help us. Another fossil fuel controlled state. The fossil fuel interests have taken over the COP process, but there is resistance, and we are a part of that resistance. So that the focus at this year's COP will be doing everything we can to get the developed first world nations, the global north, however you want to describe it, to live up to their commitments to put billions and billions of dollars on the table to help address the climate crisis in the developing world, the global south. And that these are promises that have been made and that have not been kept. And the bottom line, which defines everything that I have experienced in all of my 50 some odd years since leaving Antioch, is the people least responsible for this particular crisis are the ones who are suffering the most. And the people who are most responsible for it are still profiting off of it. And I find that I think I'll just fight about that every day. I have a philosophy: do something to fight the bastards every day. And I define my politics as from weather to climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Right. Panelists, thank you very much. I know everybody here appreciates your stories as much as I do. And you're doing good work. And you definitely have an Antioch heritage that we're hoping will pass on to this next generation and hopefully the generation after that. So thank you again for your time and your participation and all your life work for that matter. Well, maybe we could take a question or two. I don't want to push people for the next event or no.
What's the future look like for you all?
So we have a question.
Can you hear me? Hi Larry, it's lovely, it's Catherine Jordan, nice to see you.
Hi.
Can you talk about your view of the future? I mean, we're up against some very serious pushback and problems in the world. I think the rise in authoritarianism, and I can use the F word. So what are you thinking? What would you advise?
That's why I'm in Mississippi. What happens in Mississippi never stays here. If groups in Mississippi organize against really the most repressive system in the country, which they are, and succeed, which they're coming close to, they're making progress, we can defeat Trumpism. And that's not true just in Mississippi, it's true around the country. The simple and very difficult and very complicated answer is people need to organize, and they are organizing. The labor movement is changing. It's understanding how to reach people better. Big elements within the Democratic Party are. I think DSA and the entire socialist movement is understanding more about reaching people. The simple and complicated answer is people need to organize and are organizing. I always say, if people get together and stay together, mostly they lose until they win.
Have another question? No? Can you wait for a mic?
Oh,
Hang on, he's coming. They're coming. One moment, please.
I wonder what Stephen Gould answered you when you asked him why. Do you remember?
Yes, actually. He said, this has to do, well, let me take a step back. We haven't said this, but in Steve's case, in my case, I suspect in Jeff's case too, but I don't know. A lot of this had to do with us coming from the secular Jewish tradition. In my mind, it was all mixed up. Being Jewish, being left wing, it was hard for me to make that distinction because of my background. Steve's answer was in that context. He said, if you study natural history, you learn the material basis for the world. And you learn that the material world is what affects us. And that's going to be his contribution to the progressive movement. And actually it was in the end. I don't think he even knew at that time the tremendous impact he would have. But that was his answer.
Any others? All right, seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you. I might add one thing. If you're interested in Antioch's connection to the Weathermen, there's a book by Jonathan Lerner who was in Antioch, dropout also, who worked with Jeff. In fact, that's where I got Jeff's name, who wrote a book on that whole process and that time. And I can't remember the title at the moment, but it's a really interesting read.